Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. For today's video I want to talk about a topic that I've been getting a lot of questions on, both in-game and on other social media platforms and Discord, and I was really thinking that, hey, this might actually be a really good video topic to cover, especially because I have so much experience with all the different classes. And the question is, what classes would I actually recommend to new players? And this one is probably going to seem a little bit longer than it should be, but that's because I'm going to give you all of the details as someone who has played all of them on what I really think would be the fair way to aim someone. But before I actually get into any of that, I want to say everything at this point is really viable, and I mean that. It's just like if you come from a game such as World of Warcraft, you have undeniably heard of a lot of Mythic Plus progression, and people being like, oh, you know what, maybe we're not going to be taking a Holy Priest, but instead we want to be doing something like a Druid, Resto Druid, if you're looking at healers in particular. And so in Final Fantasy XIV, I have to say that things are really actually quite balanced, and so first and foremost, if you want to play anything, go for it. This is not to be like written rule of law that everyone should be playing this if they're new, or everyone should be playing that if they're new. And so as always, just take this as an opinion piece and take it with a grain of salt. I mean, these are just my opinions, and they're definitely not all going to be correct, because I am definitely human and I am definitely flawed. But anyhow, let's get into how I'm kind of going to score them. So for all of the different sections I'm going to cover, we are going to use ease of doing the rotation, ease of learning the movement and patterns in a new game in general, because I know that for a lot of people who are coming from games like World of Warcraft, maybe Terra Online, or a different MMO, or maybe not even MMOs in general, things like positionals, avoiding mechanics, like what's an orange telegraph, what's a red telegraph, all of these things are going to be just a different environment for you to learn in, and so I'm definitely taking into account how much easier it is to kind of be able to focus on that and be able to like really adapt and like learn the environment in general. Then I look into the ability to have a lot of oh no, oops kind of ways to recover from a bad situation. And then lastly, I also look at the ability for the class to bring a lot of utility to the party to make up for potentially lower numbers. If you're just newer, it can't be expected that you're going to be like parsing at the absolute top. I mean, maybe you can, and that's wonderful, but I'm just making this a consideration, just like, hey, I want to definitely make sure I contribute even if my rotation isn't perfect. And then that brings us into the different sections. So I'm gonna first off say my personal recommendation if you are a complete new player, like complete flat out new player, just one particular class from all, like the overall suggestion, then I'm going to go into the best complete new starter class for healers, DPS, and then tanks. But one thing about this category that makes it special from the other one that I'm going to say in a bit is that this doesn't include classes that you need to either previously have leveled a character or to have done any kind of quest line for. And so that means that we are leaving out Machinist, Astrologian, Dark Knight, Samurai, Red Mage, and Dancer, and Gunbreaker actually from this. And yeah, that's a lot of classes, but they're just the ones that have been added through the expansions. So we're completely leaving those out of that one. And then the next one is best starter class in general when it comes into healers, tanks, and DPS. And then lastly, I'm going to go into the best starter job based on all of the different categories in my personal experience. And so this is going to include healers, tanks, and ranged physical DPS, magical DPS, and then melee DPS. And so saying all of that preamble I think is important because there's just a lot of different ways that you could break down this sort of problem, and I think that if I do this, that it'll help guide people more towards what they are probably going to have the most fun with. Because I think that a player that's coming to this game really wanting to experience a different way of doing physical combat with melee is not going to be so interested in my general suggestion, but you know what, I'm going to include timestamps in the description, and so you can definitely hop over to that part if you are more interested in that. Anyhow, without further ado, let's please get into it. So overall, the one job that I can recommend above all others at this point in time has to be the Red Mage. There's a problem with this though, in that you do absolutely need to make sure that you have actually leveled up a previous character to unlock the Red Mage. The Red Mage actually does have a level requirement. And so unfortunately, this is not going to be one that you're going to be able to start off the bat with. But as an overall pick, when you are able to do it, I definitely think that this is worth your time to unlock once you hit level 50. Because at this point with the Red Mage, you bring so much utility to a party. Revive is honestly the ultimate utility. You bring buffs to help allies, you bring a very potent heal that you can actually spam, and that is, how to say it, very unique. You can definitely, even if you aren't doing your rotation properly, add a lot of value to the party just off the bat. And then when we talk in terms of rotation complexity, the Red Mage rotation, out of all of the DPS, I don't want to say it in a bad way, but I think that it is probably the most straightforward to understand. And that's not a bad thing. That's actually why, one of the major reasons why I have it here. But I can say, as someone who has hit endgame, who does do all this endgame content, that when I actually go into raids, like pugging raids, which if you're not familiar with the term, that means going outside of my general static, or kind of like free company. And if you're new to Final Fantasy XIV, you're probably just like, what's a free company? It basically is like a guild or a group of people, and then if I'm outside of those groups though, I'm not really sure how everyone plays. We might be having some people die during content, and so really being a Red Mage is something that I myself even do right now. And so when I make this suggestion, I'm talking about something that really does bring a lot to even end game content. And so I think that a newer player, if you were just gonna pick one particular class, I'd say definitely go with the Red Mage when you can unlock it. Just be aware that you are going to have to take one of these other suggestions to level up and then eventually hit that level requirement, and then you can do the quest line and fully unlock it. Now I want to talk about the best complete new starter classes. And so, as I said before, this isn't going to include any classes that you can unlock through questing or that you have to level up. This is going to be like, you have never touched this game before, you are brand new. What would I actually suggest? Starting out with the healer role, we're actually going to be looking at the White Mage as the class that I have to recommend to everyone if they're brand new to the game. And this again isn't to say, very similar to the Red Mage, the White Mage is not bad. It is something that is taken widely to end game, like hardest content raids and ultimate raids. This is not a pushover by any means. The White Mage, though, why I'd recommend it is it is a very direct playstyle. It deals a heck of a lot of damage on its own. It deals a lot of healing. Its healing throughput is huge. It's actually so huge that I have noticed, and even talking to other people who have mained White Mage for years, they very frequently overheal, just naturally, not intentionally. But the throughput that a White Mage can do is insane. Their MP management, meaning their resource on how much they can heal or can't, is, I don't want to say bottomless because you can, but it is really kind of tricky to heal it the bottom of the barrel of their mana. But it is easily what I have to recommend off the shelf. I'd recommend a lot of new players strongly consider this. Also, another perk is if you're a newer player and that you say want to just get to the Red Mage, just queuing in as a healer, and you start obviously as a conjurer, that you would actually get to the point where you are actually able to do a heck of a lot of queuing, burn through those levels really, really quick. And actually, I suppose I should say that more clearly. The starting is actually going to be Conjurer, and so Conjurer is going to go to White Mage later. And I'm gonna note that through the rest of the video to make sure that I say the baseline. Next up is tanks, and between tanks you have either the Gladiator or the Marauder to choose from. And a lot of people first see these two terms and they're like, what's the difference between them? And that might be a little out of scope for this video, but if you want to check out ultimate guides on them, I actually have the ultimate guide for the Warrior already on this channel, and so feel free to check it out. But my personal suggestion at this point in time actually is going to have to go to Paladin. I find that the Paladin, or Gladiator, goes and they get a heck of a lot of defensive cooldowns. They have a lot of repertoire of abilities that helps them really anchor down and hold aggro. I find that the Marauder also has a lot to itself, but I find that it's a little bit more tricky because you are juggling your HP numbers a little bit more, whereas with the Paladin, it's just, you will go into a fight and you'll know that you're gonna have to pre-pop a cooldown, and then you know that you have that mitigation the entire time, so you're not really worried about juggling numbers up and down or up or overhealing. You just don't have as much of a concern with that on Paladin or Gladiator, and so that would definitely be my recommendation for that. And then next up is my overall recommendation for a brand new DPS. And remember, I did recommend Red Mage earlier, but you do not have it unlocked until you hit level 50 and you finish its quest line. So if you were brand new, my personal recommendation would actually to be going with the Bard class. And that might seem strange to some people and might be a little controversial, but I think that it teaches you very solid things. Number one, it will allow you to move around and be able to understand what is this depth perception, because I know when you're starting a new MMO, like for a lot of people who are going from World of Warcraft to 14, is that they notice that in this instance, that they're just like, whoa, all my depth is a little bit different, things are a little more closed up, I'm feeling just a little more closer to the telegraphs that I want to be. And so the Bard really lets you explore the dynamics and the dimensions of this game and really get into the nitty-gritty of it, as well as it gives you full mobility. So if you do see an orange telegraph, it is much easier to respond to it and be able to move out of the way than if I did suggest something like the Black Mage, which is also another fantastic option if you're just looking to hit level 50, because the rotation generally in lower dungeons isn't disturbed all that much in my experience. You aren't going to have to worry about so many mechanics, but overall I definitely think that the Bard does have the edge here, because unlike the Black Mage, the Bard is fully mobile. Unfortunately, this is going to get into the melee DPS and why I actually can't recommend them. For someone coming from World of Warcraft, their melee combat is very different than the combat that we have in 14, and that while they do have some positionals in classes specifically like Rogue, when you're talking about suggesting the Monk to someone with a very dynamic positional system, in my humble opinion, I think that that is too much to put onto a new player who is being thrust into a brand new world with new classes, new buttons, just not familiar with the dimensions, not familiar with all of the different telegraphs or red markers or whatever. And so I cannot actually recommend one of the melee DPS for someone starting off brand new. And now this gets into my suggestions that I'm going to have to make, including the classes that you can unlock through quests or leveling. And so first up for healers, it's still going to be the White Mage. Astrologian is fantastic for a lot of things, but I can say that out of all of the healers, I personally do find that the Astrologian requires a lot more pre-planning and a lot more effort from the user. You're juggling on top of healing and contributing your own damage, entirely new card system, something that the White Mage doesn't even have to think about. Not to mention, with the Astrologian, their HP throughput can be quite high, but on the flip side, it does require a lot of pre-planning. You have a lot of abilities, such as you can put a field onto the battlefield that is going to be surrounded by stars. And this is a very powerful healing ability, but you need to wait for it to basically ramp up. So you place it ahead of time, you wait a few seconds, and then it becomes this massive burst heal onto the party. I think that for a newer player that is far too much to expect from them, and so unfortunately I cannot recommend that, and this is definitely still going for the White Mage in my opinion. Next up is tanks, and so while my prior suggestion was to go with the Gladiator, which would become a Paladin, my suggestion at this point of time is actually to go with the Gunbreaker. And so the Gunbreaker is a class that I have actually made an ultimate guide video on previously on this channel if you want to check it out. And so this, in my opinion, if I had to make an analogy, I'd say that the Gunbreaker would be like the Lamborghini of all of the tanks in this game. I find that out of all of them, that it is the most clear in exactly what you're getting at any time. And I do go into detail in my ultimate guide video on why, but it's just like things like they have an automatic heal over time that they can apply to themselves called Aurora, which costs nothing for them. And that heal definitely adds up over time. They have extremely powerful set of cooldowns that you know exactly what you're getting at any time. You don't need to worry about your HP spiking up or down or pre-applying shields. It really allows you to go into fights with a lot more sense of direction and getting exactly what you pay for. And so the Gunbreaker, in my opinion, as soon as you can unlock it, I do actually recommend this for newer players, hands down. I find its AoE rotation very clear, I find that its personal class mechanics are very clear, and easily hands down, it's my favorite tank. And is that biased? Yeah, that is absolutely biased, but I think that it's biased because I like it, because it's so fun to play and it is just so clean cut in exactly what you're doing. This is actually what I was raiding Savage with last expansion too. I mean last patch, my apologies. Last patch I was raiding with the Gunbreaker, as you can see through my videos, and hands down I had a blast. It is easily what I would recommend to a newer player who really wanted a good experience with this game. And now let's get into the DPS, and so this category is going to be broken into melee, physical, ranged, and magical ranged DPS. And so let's start off with magical ranged DPS. So my ultimate overall suggestion when you can unlock it is absolutely the red mage, bar none. It offers fantastic utility, it is very strong in damage, it is definitely taken into some of the hardest content that we have in the game. It is very powerful and very clear class in my opinion. And I do contrast this to the other mages that we have here. Black Mage, while I do find that its rotation is very clear and that I do think that a lot of newer players would absolutely be able to pick it up quite quickly, the real difficult thing about Black Mage is that you need to be really worried about dimensionality and placement and exactly what you can do to move, because they have very long cast times, even with high spell speed, which is a stat that as you just learn the game more you'll understand, like you can stack spell speed to cast faster. But even with high spell speed, you are still very immobile. And some Black Mage mains might be like, but we can use triple cast. Okay, yes you can, but a newer player, that'd be daunting to be like, oh, I have this utility that I can use to move, and I have this other utility that I can use to move. Oh, what do you mean I just warped to the wrong party member and now we both died? So that's kind of the reason why I can't recommend that. And then Summoner. Summoner in the past might have been a recommendation of mine, especially because they had a tanking pet that made world questing very easy, because they basically had their own personal tank. But with the rework that they experienced in Shadowbringers, I find it incredibly difficult to recommend the Summoner. When it comes down to classes, I would actually say that the most complicated rotation of any class actually belongs to the Summoner. And I did an hour and 8 minute, hour 11 minute video just breaking that down, and just the rotation for the Summoner. And so it is a very hard class for me to actually recommend, unfortunately. And yeah, that basically leaves Red Mage, and I definitely think that a newer player would absolutely thrive on the Red Mage. I have no doubt about it in my mind. So that brings us now into physical range DPS, where we have Bard, Machinist, and Dancer. Which one would I actually recommend for newer players? Actually is going to very much change at this point. I'd recommend the Dancer. And so the Bard, would I recommend it initially? Yes, because you don't have access to the Dancer initially or the Machinist, and I do think that it is a good class to learn off of. But in the higher levels, it does honestly become a bit of a flight control panel. It's not as difficult as the Summoner, but still you are keeping track of so many things and mechanics at once that it can become a little daunting. And so I unfortunately really cannot recommend it based on that. I find it quite overwhelming, even myself, when I'm going back to the Bard after a small break of not using it. It's a lot to take in at once. And so the Dancer also offers a ton of utility. It offers a party heal, it offers a party heal boost, it offers massive party shields, it offers the ability to buff DPS of your entire group significantly, which even if you're not pulling all the weight that people might hope you could, you're still giving so much utility that people are really happy that you're around still. And so hands down, Dancer, when you can unlock it, would be my recommendation here. And now this gets into the melee DPS suggestions, and this is going to be a little bit of a controversial one, unfortunately. I actually really am a fan of the Samurai for newer players. And that might be a little strange to some people because they're just like, but the positionals are a little bit harder on the Samurai. And you're right, they are. But when I look at the positionals of all the classes, I'd say that the ninja has the least positionals. I'd say the dragoon has the second least positionals, then the samurai, and then the monk is everywhere. If I'm being super honest, its positionals are way out there. And so if one class that's immediately taken off of my recommendations would be monk, hands down. And so for the samurai though, I find that while it does have a lot of positionals, I find that it really flows in with their rotation and that you can really develop a solid sense of intuition and dimensionality over time. I also would get people asking me why not dragoon or ninja then? And I personally do find that the samurai's rotation makes the most sense to me personally. I think that maybe the ninja would be the really difficult because now you're also juggling an entirely different ninjutsu mechanic that you need to memorize all of what is going on there. And for the record, I do not recommend you macro them. Macroing them, it has a lot of issues, and it's just, that would be a great other video to talk about. But you also have things like the dragoon, and that also has it where you have a bunch of different party utility that you're going to have to use. It has a bunch of different off-global cooldowns that you need to weave in, and I have done an ultimate guide on that. And so I do find that that one might actually even be really more difficult than the samurai for newer players too, because you kind of have an off-global cooldown rotation that you do at the same time as you do your normal rotation, and I just see newer players going, wait, what? So when it comes to melee DPS, my recommendation is actually the samurai for sure, because to me it brings also let me actually reel that back. When we talk about the samurai, you don't need to worry about things like party utility. You don't need to worry about juggling different movement abilities or whatever. Not as much, at least. But with the samurai, you bring a heck of a lot of damage. Like, the samurai is extremely high damage. I think actually on FF logs, which is just a way to check how much every job is doing in terms of damage, it is actually the highest, and it is supremely impressive when you see a very good samurai. In fact, they're regularly topping the DPS charts whenever I'm with one, and I'm gonna edit in FF log screenshot into this later, but there's no denying that a good samurai will almost always be welcome at this point of time. It's supremely impressive, and I'm saying that as someone who doesn't play samurai but typically buffs samurai, so they're definitely one to look out for. But anyhow, this video has gotten upsettingly long, and so I think that just go through the timestamps and yeah, figure out whatever you want from this and do with it what you will. These are just my personal recommendations, and ultimately though, I think that everyone should play what they want to play. I think that everyone has their eyes on a particular class, and honestly, everything really is viable right now. I can't think of a single class that you could pick that people would really not want you to take at this point. Everything is really good right now, which is actually quite refreshing if I'm being honest. But anyhow, that wraps up this video. I hope that you enjoyed this and hopefully learned a few things. Again, just my opinion, play what you want to play, and yeah, if this helped you at all, or if you want to just support me and my content, any likes, comments, and subscribes are immensely appreciated. Anyhow, thank you for tuning in, and see you on the next one.